Welcome back to Drip Fed Dread, the horror podcast. On this episode, I am your host. There's so many airheads underneath my desk right now, you'd be judgmentally alarmed and shocked. Dill. And today we have a subject in mind that I have been wanting to discuss for quite some time, and that is the topic on comedians in horror. So many times you see, a comedian try to break out, try to define his perception on what people think of him, and they try to do a serious movie. You got Jonah Hill, Moneyball, that dog shit movie, or fucking The Wolf of Wall Street. And you got other times where you have Jim Carrey portraying roles where he is not the goofball that people love, and that kind of rubs most the wrong way. But a lot of times these celebrities branch out into the horror genre, and it's not only to add comic relief, it's to provide a genuinely jarring performance. And I think a big thing that helps that is the fact that they are so lovable and known for their humor and quirkiness that when they are in danger, it is more impactful more times than not. So we got a list I want to talk about today. And the first one we'll start off with is Courteney Cox. In 1996, she starred in the movie Scream. We all love Monica for Friends. She was a part of this ensemble cast of just lighthearted, fun buddies, and, had a very lighthearted role on the show, too. Like, Friends has some intricacies to it and some plot thickening towards, the later seasons, but for her to step into this movie, Scream, and play this larger-than-life, sassy, and all-around bad bitch of a reporter really, launched her out of this situation where you're like, hey, she has the chops to do other things. And then on the counterpart, you could argue too, and that's the one thing I like about this topic, is that no matter what we talk about, it's not like my last episode with the plot twists where it's all almost one and the same. Like, plot twist change movie, it makes movie better. This one, there are actors and actresses that do things that you don't expect. For example, Jennifer Aniston, I believe her first movie was a horror film, and that was Leprechaun, and then she blew up to be this big celebrity. George Clooney with From Dusk Till Dawn, and that other one from the 80s, Horror High or whatever, he was in some campy horror movies and then blew up to be fucking George Clooney, the guy we know and love. And I find that very fascinating. We got some great examples on this list today. One I really want to deep dive into is one of the most charming, charismatic people in Hollywood today, and you know and love him. So, Paul Rudd. He was known for being in horror, not horror, because that's why this video is about comedians and horrors. Sorry, drank too much Mountain Dew. Not sponsored. Paul Rudd, he grew up. If you guys are familiar with the comedy troupe Stella, they are this very specific catered to comedy. It's almost a lowbrow humor, and they were very popular in the 90s and early 2000s, but they were friends and had special appearances from the likes of Elizabeth Banks, Paul Rudd, Bradley Cooper, and they were just this tight-knit group of comedians. They got the movie Wet Hot American Summer. They also created the movie Role Models, which is one of Paul Rudd's arguably funniest movies. And you say what you want about Paul Rudd, he doesn't age. He plays the same character in every movie, which he doesn't, but he's one of the most quotable comedians out there, and it's almost inadvertently due to his charisma and lovability. But he was at a time in one of the god-awful sequels to Halloween. So to say that you were in a Halloween movie, one of the most glorified franchise in horror history and cinema, is really crazy to me. He was in The Curse of Michael Myers, which came out in 1995. He played, I believe, Tommy Doyle? Yeah, the grown-up version of Tommy Doyle, and he helps the now retired Dr. Loomis for his last crusade to stop Michael Myers. And that is really cool because this movie's not well praised, and Paul Rudd gives almost a performance that's just decent. The fact that there's some good scenes with him in it, and the fact that he's trying to break out and be like a different type of actor, a genre actor, is really interesting to me. Like, I really feel like that's cool to see Paul Rudd in this movie. Another one we have, and this is on a bigger scale, in 2017, Danny McBride was a co-star in the movie Alien Covenant. You know, he got that punch comic relief in there, his subtleness. And Danny McBride, to me, he's along the lines of like a Kevin James, where like, you know, they have these demeanors to them where like at face value they seem kind of intimidating and like the manly man, but with their humor and soft approach to comedy, it really like brightens up the room and makes you attached to them. And I feel like Danny McBride, I've always said this, has like a distinct humor. Like a lot of times you could be like, oh, this actor reminds me of that one, or this one is definitely paying homage to this. But I feel like Danny McBride has a specific humor that he created himself. But, you know, he starred in this surprisingly dramatic performance as the character Tennessee. But then after this movie, he goes on to be the producer and I believe screenwriter for the remake of Halloween, which had a box office hit, you know, fucking punch to the tits of Hollywood. And like, that's a really cool thing to see, because he stars in a horror movie and then writes and produces for one of the most iconic fucking IPs in Hollywood. And I believe he's attached to The Exorcist. Also, him and David Gordon Green, who David Gordon Green is a comedian writer. So to have that is cool. And like a minute ago when I mentioned our boy Kevin James, there was this movie that came out a few years ago called Becky, where he played like this brute, like villainous Nazi. And that was like crazy to see, like how like it wasn't like even a humorous interpretation. Like seeing Kevin James on the screen was very ominous and like a little gut wrenching. Like his visceral performance as this like Nazi dude trying to like break into the house and like kill this little kid essentially was pretty ballsy, and I feel like he hit that out of the park. You know, we got some notable ones like Ty Burrell, the most lovable, you know, father figure in American television. Phil Dunphy, he was in the 2004 Dawn of the Dead, which I found really interesting. Adam Scott from Parks and Rec, Step Brothers, all these iconic comedy movies. He was in 2015's Krampus, which that movie you could say is more lighthearted and funny, but at the same time, branching out is cool. But let's talk about, if y'all know me, one of my personal favorites. And I guess you could say that I'm not sure if his first movie ever was a horror movie, but I believe Justin Long's first movie was Jeepers Creepers. If it wasn't, and you don't know the movie Jeepers Creepers, you all know Justin Long for being the lovable, goofy, charming, handsome dude in a lot of early 2000s movies. You know, you got Accepted, Dodgeball, Strange Wilderness. But he has cataloged himself into the horror genre throughout his career with sprinkles of masterpieces. You know, like I said, he was in Jeepers Creepers, and then comedian writer Kevin Smith, who was known for, you know, Clerks and all these stoner comedies like Weed, Dick, and Fart jokes, like Ben Affleck would say. Did an experimental horror movie a few years back, I believe it was 2015 or 16, called Tusk, and Justin Long played the protagonist, where he gets transformed into a walrus, which was kind of chaotic. And then he was also in Zach Kreger's unpredictable horror film Barbarian, which Barbarian to me might be the horror movie of this decade, even though it's only 2023. It's up there with that and X. But Zach Kreger, one of the creators from The Whitest Kids You Know, wrote like a genre-defying, suspenseful, witty little horror movie, and it just kind of came out of nowhere. Where I remember with the promotions, like, it wasn't really advertised. It just said, like, I saw the poster in the theaters. It was like Barbarian. And I was like, Justin Long's in that? I'll watch it. And it ended up being a massive hit, success, hidden gem. And also, I think last year he was in like this twisting adaptation of Dracula. So Justin Long, he has been very pivotal to the horror genre. And then you have other ones. A lot of people find the show The Office to be, I don't know if I'd call it a cult classic because it's so renowned, but it's definitely a fan favorite. And we have two actors on this list right now that I'm going to get to, and that is John Krasinski, Jim from The Office, who made America and the world fall in love with him as his quirky little character Jim and his romance with Pam. And he made a dramatic turn by directing and starring in the survival horror film A Quiet Place in 2018, and that became like a passion project for him. Like, he really took this story and universe and made it his own, and to see him transition from honestly like a pretty funny but like quiet and reserved character to like this heroic badass in A Quiet Place was really cool. But then you also have his partner Rainn Wilson from The Office, obviously. I'm talking about that show. The Rocker, many things. He was in Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses, which was filmed in, I believe, the tail end of 1999, but didn't come out until 2003 because of a bunch of bullshit from Universal Studios. But he was in House of a Thousand Corpses, which is a very gritty movie. On the opposite end of gritty, we have Stephen King and Robert... Why the fuck did I say Robert? George A. Romero's Creepshow, based off the comic book-esque era of the fucking 1900s, and it's an anthology film, and there's a lot of standout performances. You know, Stephen King is in it. You got, I believe, Ted Danson, but at the end, the tail end story, or the one close to the end, Leslie Nielsen has a main role, and he, depending on what your style of humor is, you got to respect the greats. He might be on the Mount Rushmore of comedy, so to have this little stint in this horror movie was very cool. Saturday Night Live, it is a huge show, and a lot of people blow up on the show. You know, you have the Adam Sandlers, the Pete Davidsons, John Mulaney was a writer, Tim Robinson was a writer, and they kind of expanded and branched out into megastars. Another person that did that for his writing and character work and acting is Bill Hader. And then when It Chapter 1 came out, all the kids that played in this movie had this little thing, an interview, and they were all naming people that they wanted to play them, and Finn Wolfhard said he wanted Bill Hader to play him, and they did it. And not only is Bill Hader a good little refreshment in this movie with his like wit and like humor, but he almost adds on to the depth of the Richie character from the book in the 1990 miniseries, where his performance breaks through and is so beyond the surface of what a funny guy is. Like, I feel like in the 1991, he was all wisecracking jokes, but you could see behind it, he was scared. But with Bill Hader, he just had like this dimensional like truth and like grittiness to his performance along the way of being hilarious, and that was very impactful. So you're seeing this theme and thread where all these comedians, they're not just being in horror movies. Like, I feel like it's not one of those things where like Dumb and Dumber, where you have Jeff Daniels, a serious actor, go in to a comedy and just like blow expectations, because that's rare. Or another time when you see a comedian in a movie and you're like, he's not funny, but it's funny that he's in it. Like, all these horror celebrities inviting these comedians into their movies and blending them in and almost like sprinkling this different vibe over it really sets the tone, because it makes these vulnerable characters more likable, having that like humorous presence. It would be like if you were in a cemetery with all your friends and you had the wisecracking buddy. Like, even though you're all on edge, like his being there almost makes you feel a little more secure. John Goodman, talented, you gotta love him. He's from Roseanne and the Big Lebowski. You know John Goodman, one of the most genuine celebrities out there. He starred in what year did this come out? 2016. 10 Cloverfield Lane, which again, he had this gritty performance, and he steals the show with a very intimidating presence and chaotic behavior as this dude who pretty much holds this girl captive underground. And you're like, damn, to see John Goodman as like more of a threat is very overwhelming, and like he just knocked it out of the park. A lot of people don't suspect that. And that's the one thing I love, that when these actors kind of commit to these roles, they do it in a way that I feel like all these people I'm listing, they're not just like, oh yeah, they got chopped up in a movie once, haha, silly them. They like straight up made the movie more iconic and almost more unbelievable. And that's one thing that you need in horror nowadays. Like, it shouldn't be all serious. It shouldn't be all fucking fun and games and fake blood and blah. The late great Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman, you know and love him. He was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie in 1992, which is really cool. And to see him in that was interesting. Another one we have, another Park and Recs alumni. You may love her, you may not like her style, but Aubrey Plaza was in 2019's Child's Play as the mother, and she had a pretty intricate role to this movie that I found really interesting. You know, like, she was in that one movie with like Zac Efron and fucking Robert De Niro, where Robert De Niro's like a horny little fucking bad grandpa or horny grandpa, I don't know what it's called, but I feel like she's in Mike and Dave Needs Wedding Dates, and I feel like she usually plays like this sassy sexual presence that's humorous, but people are like, ooh, look at her. So for her to play like the mom in Child's Play and be vulnerable is very interesting. Another comedian legend, based on what you think of this particular genre, is Jason Alexander, the great actor from Seinfeld. Long before those days, he starred in the grisly slasher film The Burning, and about a deformed camp counselor who started, killing people. And to see him break out into a role and then go on to be a comedic goldmine, a fan favorite, is a really interesting thing. You have Lil Rel Howery, he was in... I really don't know where Lil Ray came from. Like, I just remember one day he was really famous and popular and people thought he was funny, but he was in 2016's Get Out, and he was also in that Bird Box movie, so he was kind of defining the genre and, like, transitioning early into his career before, like, he was labeled. But another one of the most pivotal ones to me that genuinely blows my mind, we all know and love, and he might be the grandfather of comedy of this generation or the last, Robin Williams, the voice actor, Mrs. Doubtfire, Hook. Some of the movies we grew up as childs just putting on at night. You put on Jumanji at night because you're scared, but he ends up playing one of the most sadistic characters in the movie 1 Hour Photo from 2002. I mean, he won an Oscar for Good Will Hunting and then comes and does something like this. I mean, maybe he did Good Will Hunting after, I don't fucking know, but he wasn't associated with psychological thrillers and horror, but for him to be this villain in this movie and super disturbing, it's crazy. He plays like this like isolated photo developer who becomes obsessed with his customers, and like he starts to like entangle himself into their lives. That's a jarring movie. Like, if there's any movie on this list I have to recommend, it'd be 1 Hour Photo. Another one, long before he was keeping names out of his motherfucking mouth, maybe not even long before, maybe 2021, whatever year he got slapped. Did he get slapped in 2022? Chris Rock, he was in Spiral, the offshoot legacy sequel piece of Saw. We all know Saw, they're campy, they're not really good, but Chris Rock's performance in Saw to me was very, very powerful. And a lot of times I feel like Chris Rock, he's super funny, super, one note with his jokes. I'm not huge on his humor. I feel like he constantly delivers the same character throughout his films. But, he, with the likes of Everybody Hates Chris and all those Adam Sandler movies he's in, he took the performance on Spiral, and I feel like he played it well. Like, he was funny, but almost in like a douchey way. Like, you're more like, yo, this guy, he's playing a hardened character, a character with deep-seated, issues, and I feel like he really hit that out of the park. And when you have comedy, I feel like you take this emotion and it's to translate it into making people more together, right? Like, when you make a hit comedy and it spans ages and generations and types of ways, it bonds people together and it's universal. And I feel like horror doesn't really cater to that. So to have these comedians and their inputs and relished into this genre, it really benefits to it. It almost makes it more serviceable to watch. I got a few more on this list. We got Tim Curry. He is one of the most legendary celebrities from Rocky Horror Picture Show, legend, and all this with his oddball humor and his just charm and charismaticness. He played Pennywise, one of the most unnerving fucking villains, not only in Stephen King history, but in American cinema, even though that was a TV show technically. Ryan Reynolds, to this day, people think he's one of the most loving people of all time. You know, a lot of people love him, from Deadpool to The Proposal. A lot of people think Ryan Reynolds is one of the sexiest men alive, one of the funniest comedians out there. And he was in the Amityville Horror remake, where he gave this visceral, chaotic performance of a man being tormented and possessed by this evil spirit, where he eventually goes apeshit. So to see that side of Ryan Reynolds was very cool. You know, another one, Alfred Hitchcock, who was infamous for making Psycho the beloved masterpiece it is. They ended up remaking it. Gus Van Sant took a shot at it with like a shot-for-shot recreation, and he had Vince Vaughn, the one and only Vince Vaughn, you know, one of the funniest guys out there, one of the people that makes you feel comfortable. Even though Vince Vaughn was in that Freaky movie from last year, that was more of like a comedic horror, so you didn't really expect much from him. Him playing Norman Bates in this retelling of Psycho was really interesting to see, even though it's a younger version and he was not the Vince Vaughn we know. Seeing him as an iconic character is just as cool to me as Paul Rudd being in a Halloween movie. You're like, bro, you're a part of the Psycho IP. Jim Carrey in The Number 23, you know, we know him from being a goofball and silly and just outrageous. But, you know, he went full maniac, and it was crazy for this, you know, this comic to step into this role. I feel like a lot of people can't do what he does, and I'm grateful to know his movies and have him as a fucking comedic hero. A lot of people don't like this specific genre, but that lowbrow Adult Swim, not funny, but it's so funny because it's not humor. I think You Should Leave actually really embodied this subgenre, and like Sky launched it into mainstream. But long before that, Tim Heidecker from Tim and Eric was doing that. And to me, he's probably like one of my favorite funny comedians out there, and he really took this zaniness and like bizarre like viewing of things and like campiness and really made it his own. But then he was in Jordan Poole's movie Us as a small cameo. You know, it was serviceable, but it was cool to see him in that. And another one, a part of that list, like I feel like I'm naming all these actor-director combos, like with Zach Kreger and Justin Long, or Kevin Smith and Justin Long, but we have Jordan. Did I say Jordan Poole a second ago? If I actually said Jordan Poole, the basketball player, I'm tripping. Jordan Peele. He, as you know, is on one of the most popular, reoccurring skit showing clips of a program. What the fuck? How did I word that? He's on one of the most popular shows, Key and Peele, and he went on to be now a pretty renowned horror director with Us, Nope, and Get Out, which, you know, a lot of people disagree with that, but he's putting his name out there. And last but not least, I want to get to this on this list is Jack Nicholson. You know and love him from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you know, Batman. He's been in comedy later in his career. I mean, he's been in comedy his entire career, but his shocking performance as Ryder Gone, Madman, Jack Torrance, and The Shining, even though Stephen King had said that this interpretation of his book wasn't what he preferred, this performance of a lifetime for a movie from Jack Nicholson was just crazy. To see him embody like that loopy, like trippy, nauseating humor with a visceral, creepy approach was really excellent. And that is my list. So essentially you have all these celebrity comedians out there who started in horror, ended up directing horror, or knocking horror out of the park, and they come together and they make this genre what should be what Hollywood is doing now, like Blumhouse and all these cheap thrills, you know, the wisecracking jokes, jump scares, cheap CGI blood. They're taking the heart of the terror and putting it into the movie, and I really respect that. So, guys, that's been the episode. If you fucked with it, let me know. Subscribe, hit that little stupid button that harasses you knowing it's me. I got new videos, and I'm gonna say it one time. Give me a hell yeah for horror. Horror is funny to me.